Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
All right, my friends, here we are, New Year's Eve 2026. It's amazing to think that we've got another year behind us. It's amazing. Well, New Year's Eve 2025 for New Year's, the new year of 2026, I guess is the right way of saying that. Anyway, hope you've had a great year. You know, Monday, we talked about the most consequential stories of 2025. These were the things that happened in 2025 that I believe are going to have the greatest impact in 2026, and some far beyond that. Yesterday, we talked about what we should expect in 2026, which maybe elaborated or added to some of the consequential stories. It also gave us the opportunity to talk about things that maybe weren't stories yet or through 2025, but will be or possibly can be in 2026. And today I want to talk about what I hope happens in 2026 and beyond for this great constitutional republic. These are not predictions per se. These are things that candidly we're fighting for, trying to do influence here on our program, on the ToddCast, each and every step of the way, my friend. So, you know, a word about hope too. Hope, when I talk about hope, I'm assuming, or I'm the starting point for me isn't that it's just something that we just wish happens and then just go about our merry business. Hope to me is tied to what we're intentionally shooting for as well. It's tied to the responsibility that we have in, I guess, those hopes becoming a reality. The action that is required to get us there. The engagement from us with our government, with our culture, in our communities, our churches, whatever. That's, I talk about this. We're not helpless. And I know you know that, but I do feel like that needs to be said. It's not just I hope, you know, I speak out these hopes or I write them on a list and I put them up and just say, man, I really hope those come to be. No, we have a role in this as well. And that's really, I think, at the core of what I want to talk about here today. It's kind of the thread that holds all these things together. So that's where we're headed today, my friends. Thank you for tuning in here. The last day of 2025. I should tell you as well, we will not be in either tomorrow or Friday. There also will not be an issue of the Inner Circle newsletter going out tomorrow or Friday. We will hit the ground running full speed on Monday. What is that? January 5th, I guess. Is that right? Hard to believe. But that's when we'll be back at it here, my friends, at the program, both for the ToddCast, the radio show, and the newsletter, the Inner Circle, which, by the way, you can get for free at ToddHuffShow.com if you want to subscribe. All right, friends, are you tired of spending your hard-earned money at businesses that then turn around and support causes supported by, well, leftist causes? You're tired of spending money, getting something you need, and then realizing that the profits that were generated from your purchase are fueling causes that are antithetical to what you believe. Well, that's exactly why we created Freedom Marketplace. It is a free searchable directory for you, directory of businesses that share your values. These are businesses that have made a vow, a pledge to not support leftist candidates, leftist causes, and you can find them at freedommarketplace.net. This is something that we created. It's actually something we created so that folks could find our radio and podcast advertisers easier And then we realized, look, we can have other people who want to have a listing here who share these same values, but maybe aren't a fit for radio or podcast. And so that's kind of where this idea started. These are good patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction you are. Check it out today. Again, it's at freedommarketplace.net. Freedommarketplace.net, liberty and business, my friends, for all. Okay. What do I hope for in 2026? Some of these are obvious, but I'm just going to state them, reiterate them, because I think this is the direction that we are heading and the direction we need to be heading. Some of these things are going to be a direction maybe that we aren't heading yet, or we need more support for, or whatever. But let's start with the obvious and the simple. I hope that the economy continues to improve. I think that it will, as I shared yesterday on the ToddCast. I think that the conditions for 2026 that exist potentially will lead it to being a phenomenal economic year. I think that is a very real possibility in 26. Inflation has been, well, we've gotten it under control. It's not out of control like it was in the Biden administration years. We talked about inflation yesterday. I don't want to get into that again today in detail, but I do want to say it's not something, when you get inflation under control, you just slow its growth. You didn't undo the damage that it's done. That's where GDP growth comes into play. You got to grow your way out of these problems. Once the economy's mismanaged, you have to grow yourself out of them. And that's what we're seeing. We had great economic numbers, great GDP numbers for November. Gross domestic product, that is growing. That's headed in the positive direction. I think momentum is building. I think that if we continue to stay on this trajectory, which is an environment of, well, a business-friendly environment, basically, families will benefit, workers are going to benefit. You see wages are starting to increase, businesses will benefit. People will begin to have confidence, put more investment into their business, hire people, develop new products, solutions, whatever. All those things will happen. And even this, the business side of what we do here benefits. This is, as Reagan said, a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that that's the direction we're headed in 2026. It creates a strong economy, creates opportunity and stability. These are good things for a free people, and we will all reap the rewards of that, my friends, if we continue down this path. Number two, I hope the law is continued. I hope we continue enforcing the law and immigration policy, which, again, I'm very confident that Trump will, in the country again. I think we have, for a long time, I've talked about this before, the lawlessness of the left. It never ceases to amaze me, the way that the left thinks about these things. It's depraved thinking, candidly, in a lot of instances. That the left believes that we are all collectively responsible for every problem in society, but none of us are somehow individually responsible for anything, when the exact opposite is actually the truth. The collective is really nothing more at its core. The collective is really nothing more than the aggregate of how individuals live. If we all individually live responsibly, if we all individually live with integrity and character and a desire to follow the rule of law and a respect for liberty, then collectively we have politicians and policies that are in line with those things. When we begin to make excuses when we begin to demonize people for things that they're not responsible for example, if you think my problems are because of billionaires and millionaires, it's silly talk. That's not at all how this works. Had a long conversation with my son about this the other night, about economics, I think I shared a little bit about this, about taxes and so forth. But this, the collective response that we have, and I don't mean in some communistic way, but as we come together as a community, as a state, as a nation, and we begin to pursue laws and policies that are good, it has to start. It has to start with us. It has to start individually. We have to be pursuing the right things. We have to be willing to call the things that are good, good, and the things that are not so good, not so good, and the things that are outright evil, we have to be willing to say that as well. And enforcing the law is a fundamental thing that has been ignored in a lot of ways. Enforcing the law lack of law enforcement has permeated our cities. You see people, I saw a horrific story the other day, and I don't remember every detail, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. I read a story about a man who, this was many years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but say 15, 20-ish years ago, something like that. Broke into this house, went to the kitchen and got a knife, walked upstairs, I think it was upstairs, to the bedroom, and he killed, I think it was a 9-year-old boy in his sleep. They find the guy, they arrest him, they try him. He's found guilty. He's sentenced to whatever he's sentenced to. I just saw the story the other day that he's released 9 years, I think it's 9 years early, for good behavior. Now listen, I want to be clear here, I believe in the grace afforded to us through Jesus Christ our Lord. I believe that mercy is, we all need mercy from time to time. I'm not against these things, but I'm also for justice. And that is a wicked, heinous crime. That's not some sort of accidental sort of thing. This is intent. This is something done in cold blood. This is as bad as it gets. And to me, it makes no difference how well he behaved in prison for 9 years. That is, well, for whatever time he was in there, you should not be released for good behavior. That's just crazy to me. And you've heard the stories of other violent crimes where people are basically just given community service in some of these instances where these extreme leftist judges exist, and there's no sense of law and order. There is no sense of that in our justice system at times. And there's no sense of that in our federal government or amongst the people on the left when it comes to enforcing immigration law. We're a nation of laws. You should respect the people that are in positions of authority, that respect the office at least. But we're not subject to any person. We're a nation of laws that's created. Those laws are created through a very systematic process where there's separation of powers and there's different branches of government that have different responsibilities. We get to those laws in a certain way, and the law is what we're all subjected to. We should really have respect for the law. You don't always have to agree with the law. You can seek to change the law, but when the law exists, it needs to be enforced. I hope Donald Trump continues enforcing immigration law, deportation law, as he has been, consistently, comprehensively. We need to see a return to law and order, to national sovereignty. We're headed in that direction. Trump is certainly taking us there. A nation cannot survive, my friends, without respect for its laws. When laws that are written, that have been passed and followed the proper procedures and processes, when those are just ignored and thrown out the window, bad things will happen. What else do we have to stand upon if the law itself can just be changed at the whim of the next administration? Friends, the obvious is I hope Republicans win the midterms in 2026. In fact, more accurately, I hope conservatives win in the midterms of 2026. I hope that they challenge the current Republican leadership at all levels. I hope that Republican leadership itself becomes more conservative, or at least that they become more responsive to the accountability from the conservative base. People like Milton Friedman, the great economist, talked about things like this. He talked about, you don't have to have a circumstance where a politician agrees with all of your core beliefs. What you need is to have the politician know that he's being held accountable who have those beliefs. And if he fears or she fears or respects, I don't mean in a shaking way, but if there's a healthy respect for the people he or she serves, and the people he or she serves are paying attention and know what's going on, then they can sometimes even do things that they don't want to do that their constituents demand that they do in a good way. And that's how we hold these people accountable. But we need to have more conservatives in office, or at least people who are more responsive to being held accountable by the conservative base. There's going to be some primaries in 2026, I believe, that are going to be contentious. There's going to be establishment rhino Republicans that are going to want to hold on to seats, and there are going to be conservatives who are going to enter the race trying to restore conservative leadership or a conservative seat at the table in these districts and for these certain offices all around the country, from local elections to city elections to state and federal elections. There needs to be more conservatives in these. I hope more conservatives win in 2026. I hope more Americans accept the truth in 2026. There's a saying out there that says if you want to offend a Republican, tell him a lie. If you want to offend a leftist, tell him the truth. Tell him that men are not women and they cannot be, and that men and women are different. Watch their head explode, my friends. Tell them that liberty is precious and must be protected. Tell them that capitalism has done more. Free market capitalism has done more to lift people out of poverty around the world than any government program could ever dream of doing. Tell them that America as founded is a good thing. The principles of the Declaration, the principles in the Constitution. Obviously, I'm not talking about the issue of slavery. That's a reprehensible thing. That's part of America's history. I'm talking about the ideas and concepts. Actually, the ideas and concepts that were laid forth in our founding documents, they eventually fixed the atrocious nature of slavery here, chattel slavery in the United States. So the ideals were always there, the ideas, the principles, the beliefs, but yet we fell short in actually fulfilling those for a long time when it came to that issue. But the ideas of the Constitution, the framework of the Declaration of Independence, what it stood for, what it meant, tremendously good things. I hope more Americans accept that truth. Liberty is good. Government control is bad. It always leads to, socialism, and eventually it leads us to communism. We are not created to live that way this side of heaven. We do not need government to be our God. That role, by the way, the role of God is already taken by our Creator, Yahweh himself, and he's doing a perfectly good job. He certainly doesn't need knuckleheads and clowns in Congress or anywhere else in our government trying to say that they, in fact, are God. I hope more Americans accept truth. There's a lot when it comes to the issue of truth, my friends, that people need to accept. But they can begin to accept it in little bitty bites. That's okay. Little bitty nuggets. That's fine. But I hope more Americans accept the truth in 2026. I want to pause there. For a moment as we getting close to the end here of our first segment. And I want to remind you, my friends, program brought to you by our friends at Full Suite Wealth. Maybe you've reached the stage where managing money feels like juggling more than just numbers. You've got to deal with tax planning. You've got to deal with estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when family office services can really make a difference in your life. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services give you access to a coordinated team with advanced option strategies private equity, private credit, and legal expertise, all those things under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for your future, and making sure your legacy stays strong for generations to come. If you're ready for that next level of support, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. Jason and his team are prepared to help answer your questions and take care of you should you decide to work alongside them. fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy. Secure your future. Okay. A little bit more about truth here before I get to the break. Listen, the message or the mission of this program, of the Todd Huff Show, truly, if you look at the mission of the program, that this stuff doesn't always, I might mention it. I know I've mentioned it on here, but the mission in our actual mission statement is this: to help others hear and receive truth. And the left hates truth. I've talked about this before. The left listen, when you look at the political continuum, you have, of course, the way I look at it is you have anarchy on one end, you have absolute government control on the other. That's the left side. The right side, as you move towards the center from the right, you go from anarchy to a limited government. That's where conservatism, that's where America candidly landed. If you go on the other end of the spectrum, you've got, hardcore communism and all types of government regimes that force control over people. And then you move away from strict control, maybe from, say, communism to, say, more socialistic or semi-controlled forms of government. The problem is once you've opened that box, you always go that direction. How do you give government absolute control over some aspect of society, but not over all of it? It's where we put our focus. It's an insidious sort of thing. It's an unstoppable force in many ways. But when I speak about leftists, all liberals are not leftists. Leftists are people with a really peculiar thing going on. It's not just that they want to have a certain political outcome or have certain political beliefs. They want to fundamentally change nature, human nature, the way that life works, what's true and good and so forth. They want to fundamentally change that. And there's reasons for that, and I guess I'm looking at the clock here. I thought I could get this in. I can't. I'll do that on the other side of the break. Quick time out, though, my friends. You're listening to Conservative Not Better Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I want to wrap up what I was saying last segment. By the way, welcome to the Todd Huff Show. If you've tuned in, we're going through here the things I hope happen in 2026 and beyond. I guess it's the third day that we've kind of done something similar. Monday, we did what the kind of went through the top most, what was the word I used? The most consequential stories of 2026. Then yesterday, I told you what I'm looking to expect, what I expect happening in 2026, or Monday was the most consequential stories of 2025. They were going to have an impact in 2026 and some far beyond that. Yesterday, we talked about what we should expect in 2026, and today, we're talking about what I hope for, and what I think many of you hope for, something very similar to this, or at least in some respects, maybe very much like this, I don't know. But this is what I hope for in 2026. And as we were wrapping up the last segment there, I was talking with you about the left. And what I mean about who the left is, this isn't every liberal. This is certainly not every Democrat. A leftist is someone who wants to fundamentally change the nature of truth. In fact, some of them, they'll either seek to deny truth exists. They've kind of stopped doing that in a way. When I was in college, there were people who were moral relativists. I think you spend 5 minutes in that camp and you realize you've got a major problem, because they'll say truth is relative, to which you can say, are you absolutely sure that that's true? And then they're stuck Because if they say it's not relative, that it's not absolute, then you say, fine, it doesn't. What are you telling me about anyway? What are you trying to convince me of? If it's not absolute, then why are you trying so hard to get me to believe it as something that is true? You're conflicted. You're contradicting yourself. If they admit that it is absolutely true to say that truth is relative, then they've defeated their own argument themselves. So there's really no place to go there. It's silly. It's absolutely silliness. In fact, I remember a story. I think Chris, who fills in, Chris Dunham, who's from India. I think he's the one that told the story. It might have been someone else, but I think he was telling the story about Ravi Zacharias, who I know that's a whole situation for those of you who followed him. He's, of course, passed away here recently in the past couple of years, and there was a lot of fallout from some things he was involved with, and I don't want to get into that, but he was brilliant in the way that he defended truth and Christianity and that sort of things, explained things. And he was in a debate with somebody, I think it was Ravi. He was in a debate with the professor who was trying to tell Ravi, who of course is from the East, how people in the East look at truth. It can be a both and sort of thing. And Ravi responded, when I crossed the street, he said, I look both ways because it's either me or the bus. And the professor nodded his head and he said, it is kind of unavoidable, isn't it? And to which Ravi said, yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the whole point here, is that you can't be a moral relativist. At some point, you have to accept that it's either or. And the left doesn't like that. They fought that. But they realize that's a losing proposition as well. So they continually try to find new ways to move away from people accepting truth. Because I'll tell you, at their core, what they're afraid of more than anything is, well, they're afraid of the truth, and they don't like the idea that truth comes from God. See, you start connecting these dots. You accept truth. Truth must come from a moral lawgiver, a final arbiter of what is true, someone who's in control of the universe. I think these things are inextricably linked. Certainly people can make the case that they're not, but you have a lot of problems. You have a lot of problems making moral arguments if you don't have a moral lawgiver. But whatever the case may be, I think people on the left are so convicted of what is true internally, and I would say that comes by the Spirit of God, our Creator. But they don't like it. They want to live another way. And listen, if we're all being true, we all are like that. We've all been like that. We all maybe are currently like that with something. I don't know. But I do know this, that when you know you're doing something that is in violation of what is good or true or wholesome or whatever, it's hard to live there intellectually. It's hard to not have problems and to have that gnaw at you. And so they've decided, look, we want to live in this space, but we want, we'll bring all these people together who want to reject all these truths, and we'll say basically, listen, we all get together and we'll go out there and we'll make arguments defending one another, even if we don't relate, even if you're fighting a truth that I don't really care about, and I'm fighting something, I'm trying to violate truth and God's design in another way. We'll defend each other because we're all kind of pushing in the same general direction, which is to get out of this situation where we have these convictions, where we have these this guilt, or this conviction is really what it is for doing the wrong thing. And they set themselves up as enemies of the truth, and they start telling us all sorts of nonsense. I mean, literal nonsense. You may have seen, Matt Walsh does a great job with What is a Woman, right? And you see these people, they've studied these things for years, and they can't tell you when you ask them, what is a woman? They act appalled. I can't believe you'd ask me that question. What do you mean, what is a woman? Well, I'm just asking you. You tell me you're a woman. You're clearly a man. You mean woman. You use the word woman for some reason. What do you mean when you say that? What does that word mean? It means I'm a woman. Well, what the world does that mean? Did you not go to third grade when they said when you're defining something, you can't use that term to define itself? What is a woman? Well, it's a person who presents and identifies as a woman. What the world does that mean? What are they presenting as? What? And this goes on. You've seen this done. He's done this countless times. These are people who are in positions at universities whose job it is to study gender and to tell us about all these differences and to educate us old-fashioned hayseed hicks to understand gender properly. And what do they tell us? They tell us that a woman is a person who identifies as a woman. It's absolute madness and nonsense. But this is ultimately where refusing to accept truth leads us. And that's just one example. But how many other things have you seen people doing mental backflips over to try to prevent from acknowledging the truth? I'm reminded when we went into a recession during Biden's term in office, a short one. That's 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. We technically hit that. It wasn't by much. And maybe it wasn't, you can make the case that the numbers were close enough to where whatever, it wouldn't be truly identified as such. But they told us, they tried to redefine what the terms were. They tried to say, well, that's not really what a recession is. I remember all this. How many times have they changed definitions in the dictionary? Literally changed definitions of things because they don't like to establish, or I should say, accept established truth. So I hope more people come to accept the truth in 2026. But at its core, the rejection of truth, I believe this firmly. I believe when people openly reject an obvious truth, it is because they're in open rebellion with the creator of the universe. They are so convicted that what they are doing is not a good thing. What they're believing, teaching, whatever, is not good. And those convictions and voices are so strong inside their mind and head and so forth that they can't stand to hear another person say something that's reinforced internally. And so they scream and act like lunatics when you try to present truth to them. That's what's happening, my friends. And speaking of that, I hope more conservatives continue to engage or start to engage even in 2026. We can't all do everything. I remember when I was in school, when I played football for Tom Blank, one of my favorite people that I've ever had the encounter or the chance to encounter and to get to know. He was my high school football coach, 1993 and 1994, I believe. He was instrumental in helping me learn about Jesus by getting me to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes football camp in 1993 where I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And he used to have us say something, and I'm going to say it really quickly here. He said, this was at practice. He would say, I am one. I am only one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And that which I can do, I will do. And that which I will do by God's grace, I'll give credit. We can't all do everything. We can all do something, my friends. And we better get to work in 2026 and continue to do as much as we possibly can. Let's face it, living with discomfort, my friends, is tough. And while prescription medications can certainly help, they often come with a long list of side effects, not to mention the risk of dependency. That's why more people are exploring natural options like Kratom from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. Family-run company, do things the right way. They work directly with Indonesian farmers. They lab test every batch that they produce that is made available to you, my friends. No synthetics, no chemicals, no surprises, just honest, natural Kratom that's been used for generations. The problems that you've heard about in the news comes from synthetic blends, contaminated junk. Christopher's does not have that. You can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use code Todd Huff to save 10%. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Final segment here of the Todd Huff Show, the ToddCast for the year. It's unbelievable how quickly time flies, my friends. Program brought to you in part by our friends at 48 Financial. Friends, there's a lot of companies out there that don't share our Christian values. The good news is that you don't have to invest with them. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They help screen out companies that go against your faith, your values, to create a plan that's tailored to your goals. And they'll handle the heavy lifting so you can focus on what really matters. Want to see if your current investments align with your values? Head on over to 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. You can take a quick assessment. They will show you. That assessment will show you to what degree your current investments align with your values. I did it. It's very quick, painless, and it's something that could really give you insight into that. 48 Financial, because your values matter, and so, my friends, does your money. Talking here in the time we have available about what I hope for in 2026. I just mentioned that I hope conservatives either start to or continue to engage. I've mentioned that that's one of the things that we try to do on this show, to give confidence and clarity and tools and insight to help people become better conservative communicators, better conservative persuaders, whatever you want to call this, more effective communicators, helping to clarify all the noise that's out there, all the clutter, all the nonsense, all the lies. You'll continue, of course, to see more of that in 2026. In fact, maybe even some things where we do deeper dives on as we continue to build out things like the newsletter and just different things like that. I also hope that there's a renewed commitment in 2026 to America's founding. I think that we are at a point here where we're likely living through what could be considered historically as the second great American Revolution. America will be 250 years old next year. 250 years old. That's an incredible thing. Most democracies, you've probably heard, collapse around 200 years. And you can see why, right? I mean, this is what we're experiencing here in this society. You can see it's been dealt with in other societies as well. And one of the things I think that we need to really think about, and I know that this one hurt, this one gets personal, but if you read the Declaration of Independence, the founders put this line, it's hard to say what my favorite line is in the Declaration, but this is definitely a contender. In the Declaration, they write this: we, the people, of course, signing the Declaration, said this: we mutually pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And those weren't just words. They made a commitment. They made a commitment to basically say we're willing to die for this. We're willing to lose everything we have for this. We're putting our name, our reputation on the line. Things have gotten this bad. We are prepared to do whatever it takes. And that's hard to find today. And you put these were influential, successful men who had a lot to lose, who made this statement, who signed on to this document in 1776. That commitment is incredibly intimidating. But here's the truth, my friends. Without that sort of resolve, without that level of resolve and commitment, we are going to lose everything anyway. See, it's almost a paradox. If you're not willing to risk it all, you're going to lose it all anyway. The tighter you try to hold it, the more it's going to be snatched from your hand. It reminds me, again, not in a strict sense, but it reminds me of similarly when Jesus told the people following him. He said, he who loses his life will save it, right? Basically, there's something that's required here where you have to give up, you have to submit, in the case of Christianity, everything to Christ and his lordship. You can't hold on to things. And I'm not saying, look, the commitment to the Constitution is the same as that. But I am saying there's something similar there to the concept that says, look, a tyrannical government that we've been moving toward for a long, long time now, an out-of-control, bloated bureaucracy that's got control over everything. They've got technology now. They've got all sorts of things. If we're not prepared to sacrifice everything in defense of liberty, we're all going to lose everything. And I know, listen, I know that there's a king in the Bible who was who was basically told of destruction that was coming. And when he inquired and found that that was not in his lifetime, he basically said, cool, I can eat, drink, and be merry. And that's someone else's problem. And that's not the way that we should be looking at this. I mean, this is our children's future, our grandchildren's future. And we have to be willing to engage in the fight. I know that may sound extreme to a lot of people, but I would say that the reason it sounds extreme is because we've wanted to have the blessings that come from having liberty without taking the responsibility collectively. I don't mean you specifically, but maybe somebody out there. But the bottom line is we want the blessings of the liberty without having to pay the cost to protect it, to defend it, to pass it on to the next generation. So, folks, those are my hopes for 2026 and beyond. I've got to go. Happy New Year, SDG.